Sometimes government policy is carried out with very flamboyant and melodramatic announcements that everyone can listen to and understand, but more often it's carried out through a series of documents, very lengthy documents, sometimes legal documents that have a great deal of complexity to them. And oftentimes when that happens, the government, if it has a policy or is pursuing things that are unpopular, especially among its own voters, can just try and confuse things by claiming that people's descriptions of what they're doing is untrue and false, and trying to just confuse people with a bunch of irrelevancies or false claims. And then a lot of people don't know what to make of it. They just throw up their hands because most people don't have the time to sort through all of that. And especially if you're a supporter of a political movement and you hear that they're pursuing a policy that you just think is so anathema to their ideology that you don't want to believe that they're doing, you're happy to hear from the government when they say, oh, that's a lie, don't listen to the persons or the people saying that. That's not actually what we're doing. And yet, when that happens, I think it's very incumbent upon everybody who wants to know what their government is doing to actually understand the truth. And that is what happened last night. I've been reporting for several months now on the Trump administration's systematic efforts to force American universities to adopt expanded hate speech codes. Remember, for so long, conservatives hated hate speech codes on college campuses. They condemned it as censorship. They said it's designed to suppress ideas. Oftentimes, those hate speech codes were justified on the grounds that it's necessary to protect minority groups or that those ideas are hateful and incite violence. And all of this, we were told by most conservatives that I know, I think probably a consensus, close to unanimity, we were told that this is just repressive behavior, that faculty and students on campus should have the freedom to express whatever views they want. And if they're controversial, if they're offensive, if they're disliked by others, the solution is not to ban those ideas or punish those people, but to allow open debate to flourish and people to hear those ideas. And that is a critique I vehemently have agreed with. And I've long sided with conservatives on this censorship debate as it has formed over the last, say, 6, 7, 8 years when it comes to online discourse, when it comes to campus discourse. Free speech is something that is not just a constitutional guarantee, and according to the Declaration of Independence, a right guaranteed by God, but it is also central to the American ethos of how we think about how debate should unfold. We don't trust central authority to dictate what ideas are prohibited and which ones aren't. Instead, we believe in the free flow of ideas and the ability of adults to listen and hear and make up their own mind. And that's the opposite of what the Trump administration has now been doing, what they said they believed in. Donald Trump in his inauguration and other times said he wanted to restore free speech. Early on in the administration, J.D. Vance went to Europe and chided them for having a long list of prohibited ideas for which their citizens are punished if they express those views. And the reality is that's exactly what the Trump administration has been doing. So I want to make clear, I'm not talking here about the controversies over deporting foreign students for criticizing Israel. That's a separate issue. That's part of this discussion, but that's totally ancillary and secondary. I've covered that many times. That is not what I'm discussing. What I'm talking about is the formal investigations by the Trump administration into most of our leading universities, threats or carrying through on those threats to deny them federal funds and then only restore it if they meet a whole wide variety of demands. One of those leading demands being that you are now forced to expand hate speech codes. Not to eliminate them, not to reduce them, but to expand hate speech codes. Particularly when it comes to Israel and Jewish people, in order to add to the list of ideas and opinions and viewpoints that you cannot express on college campuses if you're an American student, if you're an American professor, if you're an American administrator, that cannot be in the curriculum without being punished. It's pure censorship in service of a foreign country and a minority group in the United States that happens to be in favor with the White House, just like other minority groups were in favor with prior Democratic administrations, and they too then got the benefit, if you want to call it that, of having views that offend them or that they dislike being censored. And that's exactly what the Trump administration is doing, and I've been documenting it for a long time. It specifically centers around this new definition of anti-Semitism that Israel promulgated. It got Europe to adopt it formally into law. it makes it a crime in many instances to advocate a boycott of Israel, a crime in Europe to advocate a boycott of Israel, but also to say all sorts of things about Israel that are commonly expressed criticisms of Israel, which we will show you. But the Trump administration is now hell-bent on making sure that Americans leading colleges have that hate speech code expanded to increase the list of ideas about Israel that you cannot express without being punished. Not for foreign students, but for all students, all faculty, all administrators, including American students and American faculty. And when I pointed it out yesterday and it began to spread, including to a lot of Trump supporters and MAGA influencers who expressed concern about this policy, the White House went into action to try and convince people that what I was saying was untrue, even though what I'm saying is easily documented and proven and absolutely and indisputably true, as I'm about to show you. So the tweet that really catalyzed this whole dispute that culminated in Stephen Miller going on to social media and proclaiming my claims to be, quote, patently false was this one that I posted sometime in the middle of the day. It was in response to a tweet that somebody had posted, someone by the name of Majid Hosseini, where I posted the IHRA definition, showed how the Trump administration is increasingly demanding schools accept it and how it amounts to censorship, very severe censorship, when it comes to discussing Israel, the U.S. relationship to Israel, particular Jewish individuals. And Majid Hosseini said this, quote, and criticizing America is tolerated and accepted, but criticizing Israel isn't. Had those students replaced the word Israel with America in everything they said and wrote them, there would be zero punishment for them. And in response to that tweet, on top of it, I wrote this, quote, exactly. No foreign students are being deported by the Trump State Department and ICE for criticizing the U.S., only for criticizing Israel. Just like the hate speech codes Trump demanded U.S. colleges adopt allows students to call the U.S. a racist endeavor, but not to call Israel that. So there are two issues there. One is the deportation of students in the United States legally for the crime of criticizing Israel. That's one issue. Leave that aside because that involves foreigners. We've covered that many times. The other issue is, in my view, even more serious, which is this censorship code, these censorship codes that came from Israel and that the Trump administration are now forcing our leading universities like Harvard and Columbia, which have already done so, and others as well, Brown, to adopt these expanded hate speech codes. Think about that. The Trump administration wants to expand hate speech codes on campuses after pretending for so long to find them offensive. And it's being done under this new definition of anti-Semitism called the IHRA definition. It stands for the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance. And just to underscore the point and to document that what I was saying was true, in the next tweet I wrote this, quote, these are the examples of forbidden ideas under the new IHRA hate speech codes Trump forced Harvard, Columbia, and others to censor the speech of American faculty members and students. Remember, these are ideas that are in the definition itself. The definition gives a definition of what is hate speech, and then it says here are illustrative examples that are incorporated into the definition of things you may not say without being guilty of anti-Semitism. And there are a bunch of ideas about Israel and Jews. You're allowed to say these things about any other country in the world, including the United States, just not Israel. You're allowed to say these things about any other group, just not Jews. So here are just a few of the examples. You are not allowed to, under this definition Trump and the Trump administration is forcing American universities to adopt, you are not allowed to deny the Jewish people their right to discrimination by claiming that the existence of Israel is a racist endeavor. You're not allowed to say Israel is a racist endeavor, even though the idea of Zionism is that it's based on Jewish supremacy, rule of Jews over non-Jews. That is inherent in the definition of Zionism. You're not allowed to claim that that's a racist endeavor, even if you think it is, on college campuses or under this, wherever this definition prevails. You are allowed to say the United States is a racist endeavor, and of course a lot of people do say that. That's totally fine. You're not going to be punished in any way for saying that. You can be an American student, American professor, call the United States racist every day. You're totally fine. Call China racist, or Iran racist, or Russia a racist endeavor, or the UK a racist endeavor, anything you want. All 192 countries, call them racist endeavors. Just do not say that about Israel, or you will be punished. And this is not examples that I created. These are examples in the definition. You may not deny the Jewish people the right to self-determination by claiming that the existence of the state of Israel is a racist endeavor. This is a banned, prohibited idea under the definition under the hate speech codes that the Trump administration adopted and is now forcing American colleges to adopt as well. Another thing you're not allowed to do is to apply double standards by requiring of Israel behavior not expected or demanded of any other democratic nation. So if you criticize Israel, you better be prepared to show that you apply those same standards to other democratic nations. If you want to criticize the United States, you don't have that burden. You don't have to, it's totally fine to apply a double standard when criticizing the United States. You don't have to prove that, oh, I also criticize France for this, and Norway and Uruguay and Korea, South Korea. No, you don't have that burden. You don't have that burden for any other country. But if you criticize Israel, you better be sure you're not applying double standards, or you will be guilty of anti-Semitism. You're also not allowed to use the, quote, symbols and images associated with classic anti-Semitism. For example, claiming that Jews killed Jesus. Now, anybody who has read the New Testament and the account of Jesus being sentenced to death knows that both Romans and Jews played a role in it. The Romans were the governing party, but the Jews looked at Jesus as a huge threat to their religion because he was a Jew but preaching a different religion. And they went to the Romans and expressed their desire for Jesus to be killed. Some Christians don't believe that. Some Christians believe that. There's biblical support in the text for it. Sometimes it's exaggerated. Sometimes it's not. You should be free to debate that like any other idea, but no, you're not allowed to debate that. If you are a Christian and your religion and your reading of the Bible teaches you historically that Jews are responsible for the death of Jesus, you're not allowed to say that. That's anti-Semitism. Here, right here, e.g., claims of Jews killing Jesus. Here's another thing you're not allowed to do. You're not allowed to draw comparisons of contemporary Israel policy to that of the Nazis. So if you look at the policy of the Israeli government to block food, and by the way, let me just emphasize here, none of this has to do with Israel. It doesn't matter what your views are of Israel. You can hate Israel, you can love Israel. This is not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about free speech in the United States. The ability to debate views and ideas and opinions and to express them without being punished. That is the right guaranteed by the Constitution, according to American founding, by God, that the Trump administration is attacking and eroding, not for foreign students, but for American students, faculty, and administrators on our leading college campuses and in agencies as well. You cannot compare the Israeli government's actions, say if you think the Israelis are blockading food and purposely starving Gazans to death, as many people do, and say, oh, this is something the Nazis did as well in various ghettos or in concentration camps. This is a prohibited idea. You can be punished for that. You can be sanctioned, expelled. If you work in a government agency, you can be punished as well. It's a prohibited idea to compare the actions of the current day Israeli government to Nazis. You are perfectly permitted, if you're an American citizen on American soil, in an American university, to compare the American government to Nazis. It was done all the time. George Bush was constantly compared to Adolf Hitler. Donald Trump is constantly compared to Adolf Hitler. The Iraq War has often been compared to German aggression, Nazi aggression. So was the Vietnam War. That's all fine. Say that as much as you want every day. You have nothing to worry about. What you cannot do is say it about Israel. You cannot compare Israeli policy to Nazis. You're absolutely free to do that for any other country. Here are just a few more, just to illustrate how severe this censorship is. You are not allowed to accuse Jewish citizens of being more loyal to Israel or to the alleged priorities of Jews worldwide. You can't say they're more loyal to Israel than to the interests of their own nations. So if you hear Ben Shapiro's speech and afterward you say, well, I listened to Ben Shapiro speak and it seems to me like he has more loyalty to Israel than he does to the United States, sorry, that's banned. That's a banned idea. You can be punished for that. Found guilty of anti-Semitism. Even if Ben Shapiro says it, even if Barry Weiss says it, even if, I say, a Christian Zionist comes to your school, or you hear a speech or you read a text, and they say, I love my country, the United States, but I believe God has compelled me to be devoted to the state of Israel. That's my priority scheme. And then you observe that, oh, this person, I guess you're actually, you know what? You're allowed to say it. You're allowed to accuse Christian Zionists of being more loyal to Israel than to the United States. It only applies to Jewish citizens. You're not just, the prohibition is just, you can't say that about Jewish citizens. You can say Irish Catholics are more devoted to the Vatican or to Ireland than to the United States. You can say Italian Americans are more devoted to Italy. You can say Argentine Americans seem more devoted to Argentina. They care more about Argentina. Totally fine. Just you cannot say that about Jewish individuals vis-a-vis Israel. That is a banned idea on American campus under the hate speech code that the Trump administration first adopted for itself and is now imposing on our leading universities. Now, when I posted this, as I mentioned before, there had been several leading MAGA influencers like Mike Cernovich. Above what I wrote there, he said, quote, troubling. This is troubling, meaning what the Trump administration is doing. And then moments later, Mike Cernovich went to a White House official and I said, what's up with this? And he posted this, again, above my tweet, quote, White House official and asked for a comment, quote, this wasn't in the deal, and the White House is opposed to so-called hate speech rules. Colombia may have adopted the rules independently of the settlement, which is a different issue. To call that a lie, that the Trump administration is opposed to hate speech rules, is to be way too generous to the Trump administration. They have been demanding and pressuring and forcing American colleges to do exactly that, to adopt this expanded IA. Why? They're not doing it on their own. They're doing it because the Trump administration is demanding it. And in response to Mike Cernovich saying, oh, the White House told me that, I said, this person is deceiving you. You can see for yourself. Here's a March 13th letter sent by Trump officials to Colombia with the Trump administration's demands to restore funding. They explicitly require implementation of an expanded hate speech code like the IHRA that Trump adopted. Here is from the letter that the Trump administration sent to Colombia that ultimately led to the first agreement. They just reached a second agreement. And here's what they said. One of the things we demand, that you must formalize, adopt, and promulgate a definition of anti-Semitism. And then they said President Trump's executive order was the IHRA definition. So they're saying, we want a new definition of anti-Semitism, an expanded one, and as an example of one thing that would be acceptable to us, you can use the IHRA definition that Trump in an executive order adopted for the US government, which is the one that I just read you, the one that contains all sorts of prohibited and outlawed ideas that, of course, ought to be permissible to express, to be expressed. Some people try to claim that the next sentence, you also must anti-Zionist discrimination against Jews in areas unrelated to Israel or the Middle East must be addressed. That's a separate requirement. That's just saying anti-Zionist discrimination. What does that even mean? You're allowed to oppose the ideology of Zionism. It's a new ideology. It emerged only in the very late 19th century, early 20th century. It wasn't accepted until 1948 when the Jews got their own state. Many, many Jews opposed it. Many Jews still oppose it. To be anti-Zionist is not bigoted, but if the Trump administration is saying that it is, they're saying you must address anti-Zionist discrimination, not in Israel, but in the U.S. But that is totally separate from this demand. Formalize, adopt, and promulgate a definition of anti-Semitism, such as the IHRA definition, which President Trump adopted for himself. And then Colombia went on to do exactly that as part of a deal. Again, there are two stages to this deal. There's one that just happened recently. The one prior to that was one where Colombia said we're adopting the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism. Here's the three Trump officials who signed the letter: Josh Gruenbaum of the General Services Administration, Thomas Wheeler of the Department of Education, and Sean Keaveney of the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. Now, when that didn't work, when they couldn't convince MAGA influencers to say, you know what, this seems false, because it's not false, it's absolutely 100% true. I'm about to show you a lot more evidence for it as well, beyond what I just showed. It's not even in dispute. The Trump administration has been demanding this over and over. It's such a lie to say that they don't like or they're opposed to hate speech codes. They have I just showed you. They said to Colombia, this is one of the things you must do. Adopt an anti-definition Semitism along the lines of what Trump adopted, like the IHRA. I mean, that's right in the letter. So after that didn't work, they sent Stephen Miller out, who, as I said, is popular among a lot of Trump supporters. People just blindly believe what he says. He didn't present any evidence or documents. He just confused things, as I said at the start, is one of the things you can do if you're a government official trying to get the people who support you to kind of not be sure, or at least doubt, or walk away from it and saying, I'm not really sure. I trust Stephen Miller. He says it's not true. I don't care how much evidence I see. I'm going to decide this is too unclear, or I'm going to trust Stephen Miller. Here's what he said above my tweet. Quote, "This is just patently false. We have officials working continuously to identify, revoke, or deny foreigners visas who espouse hatred for America or its people. This is a top priority. College students who witness such contact can use the ICE tip line." So that's about whether they're deporting students who criticize Israel, and I'll get to that, but that's the thing I'm leaving aside. As for the issue about restricting the speech of American students and professors on campuses, he says, also, there is no, quote, speech code of any kind in the Columbia deal. There is an ironclad requirement with enforcement mechanisms to admit students based on actual merit and not illegal racial quotas, set aside, or preferences. Yes, that is in the deal. But the Trump administration also cajoled and coerced Columbia to adopt the IHRA definition, which severely attacks the free speech rights of American students at Columbia and professors by outlawing that long list of views I just showed you. One of the things they're doing is they're pretending that the deal they just signed with Columbia is the only deal. It's actually the second deal. Here's the president of Columbia University, Claire Shipman. And in July of 2025, she unveiled this resolution of an agreement between the United States of America and Colombia. And if you read that, there's no hate speech code in there. But in the first agreement that they announced, which was March of 2025, following that letter I just showed you, here's the same Claire Shipman, the president of Columbia University, in March of 2025, with the title, "Advancing Our Work to Combat Discrimination, Harassment, and Anti-Semitism at Columbia." And the text is, "Addressing discrimination and harassment, implementation of effective anti-discrimination policies. The new Office of Institutional Equity substantially revised the university's anti-discrimination and discriminatory harassment policies for students and groups, including the ability to sanction groups. The university's approach and relevant policies will incorporate the definition of anti-Semitism recommended by Columbia's Anti-Semitism Task Force in August of 2024. And then here's the task force report from August of 2024. Columbia University student experiences of anti-Semitism. And this was the definition that they were going to adopt in 2024 before the Trump administration took over. Quote, "The task force recommends the following working definition of anti-Semitism. For pedagogy and training purposes only, it is not intended to be used in disciplinary procedures. Anti-Semitism is prejudice, discrimination, hate, or violence directed at Jews, including Jewish Israelis. Anti-Semitism can manifest in a range of ways, including ethnic slurs, epithets, and caricatures, stereotypes, anti-Semitic tropes and symbols, Holocaust denial, targeting Jews or Israelis for violence or celebrating violence against them, exclusion or discrimination based on Jewish identity or ancestry, or real or perceived ties to Israel, and certain double standards applied to Israel. So it took some from the IHRA definition, but it wasn't the IHRA definition. But once the Trump administration sent its letter to Columbia University, we showed you the March 13th letter, where they specifically said, we want you to adopt a definition of anti-Semitism similar to the one that Trump adopted, which is the IHRA one. And here is the working definition of anti-Semitism from the IHRA. And those have the examples that I showed you. Then here is the statement from Claire Shipman, July 15, 2025. Our additional commitments to combating anti-Semitism. As part of our March 21st commitments, Columbia announced we would incorporate the definition of anti-Semitism as recommended by our Anti-Semitism Task Force in August 2024 into our anti-discrimination policies. We felt then, as we do now, that it is important to use a definition of anti-Semitism that reflects the experiences of many within Columbia's Jewish community. Our task force had recommended that definition for use in education and pedagogy. While we remain committed to that carefully constructed definition, meaning we still think we should be able to use that more limited definition, now that the Trump administration has demanded we expand the definition of hate speech for anti-Semitism and specifically said, pointed to the IHRA definition, we are today also formally incorporating the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism. So in 2024, under pressure, they were going to adopt an anti-Semitism definition that was much narrower than this IHRA one, which bans a whole wide range of ideas about Israel and Jewish people. The Trump administration then takes away their funding and writes them a letter saying, if you want to get funding back, here are the things you must do. One of which is to implement a new definition of anti-Semitism like the IHRA one that Trump adopted for the government. And then a month later, she says, I still think, the president of Columbia, that definition we already adopted last year is sufficient, but given all the pressure, we're now going to adopt the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism. And this has happened over and over at so many other different schools, including Harvard and Brown and many other places. This is the Trump administration's tactic. All right, so I don't understand how Stephen Miller can look at any of Trump's supporters with a straight face and say, you know what? No, we hate hate speech codes. We've been telling you we hate hate speech codes forever. We think they're censorship, and we still do. What? You've been writing letters to our leading universities threatening them to take away their funding unless they adopt expanded hate speech codes. And then they've been doing it in response to your demands, and then you restore the funding. If you hate hate speech codes, why aren't you condemning Columbia and Harvard for expanding their hate speech codes to prevent a whole wide range of views about Israel? It's because you've been demanding it. You want them to do it. That's why you're not condemning them for it. You're praising them for it. You're giving them their funding back as a reward for having done it. Just to give you a sense for how incredibly repressive this is, what a censorship climate this is producing, and again, this is not for foreign students, it's for American students and American professors. Here's an article from Associated Press, July 25th, which is right after Columbia, under pressure from the Trump administration, announced the implementation of this hate speech code. The title was, "A Columbia genocide scholar says she now may leave Columbia over the university's new definition of anti-Semitism." This is a Jewish professor named Marianne Hirsch, who's one of the nation's leading genocide scholars. And this is what the text says, quote, "For years, Marianne Hirsch, a prominent genocide scholar at Columbia University, has used Hannah Arendt's book about the trial of a Nazi war criminal Eichmann in Jerusalem, a report on the banality of evil, one of the most famous World War II Holocaust books written by Hannah Arendt, to spark discussion among her students about the Holocaust and its lingering traumas. But after Columbia's recent adoption of a new definition of anti-Semitism, which casts certain criticism of Israel as hate speech, Professor Hirsch fears she may face official sanction for even mentioning the landmark text by Arendt, a philosopher who criticized Israel's founding. Hannah Arendt was a Jewish woman, one of the leading French intellectuals in philosophy, who wrote about the Nuremberg trials and coined the phrase banality of evil. And she was a Jewish woman who opposed Zionism. And her books contain opposition to Zionism as racist and other things. And this scholar is now saying, because of this definition of anti-Semitism and these lists of prohibited ideas that the Trump administration forced the university to implement, I don't even think I can recommend or teach Hannah Arendt's book anymore, because she condemns Zionism as a racist ideology, which is one of the banned ideas. The article goes on, quote, for the first time since she started teaching 5 decades ago, Hirsch, the daughter of 2 Holocaust survivors, is now thinking of leaving the classroom altogether. Quote, a university that treats criticism of Israel as anti-Semitic and threatens sanctions for those who disobey is no longer a place of open inquiry, she told the Associated Press. I just don't see how I can teach about genocide in that environment. Hirsch is not alone. At universities across the country, academics have raised alarm about growing efforts to define anti-Semitism on terms pushed by the Trump administration, often under the threat of federal cuts. So please look at this. Stephen Miller had the audacity, this is how little he thinks of MAGA supporters, to go and say, my reporting, my claims are patently false. They're not trying to advocate for expanded definitions of hate speech and anti-Semitism. They actually oppose that. And every single one of these administrations will tell you that the only reason they ended up adopting these far broader hate speech definitions that ban a whole wide range of criticism of Israel and Jews is because of the Trump administration's pushing this on them under threat of removing federal funding. This is the Trump administration demanding universities censor the speech of American citizens and American universities about Israel and about Jews. And Stephen Miller knows that if he just goes and says, that's a lie, it's blatantly false, we wouldn't do that. We hate speech. Enough people are going to be like, and I saw enough people saying, this is wrong, Glenn Greenwald's lying. This is just about foreigners, like just idiot stuff. But I really don't blame them, because people do put trust and faith in government leaders like Stephen Miller. And when he comes out and says it's patently false, even though it's patently true, enough people are going to be confused by it or misled by it. And a lot of people want to be misled by it. And somehow these people started thinking, even though these are hate speech codes that apply to all students and faculty at American colleges, that somehow it only applies to foreign students. They conflated it with the issue of deporting foreign students. And here's the AP reporting. It's what you can get from talking to any one of these administrations, or just looking at the Trump administration's letters and demands themselves, that this is all coming from the Trump administration. The article concludes, quote, for Professor Hirsch, the restrictions on drawing comparisons to the Holocaust and questioning Israel's founding amount to, quote, clear censorship, which she fears will chill discussion in the classroom and open her and other faculty up to spurious lawsuits. Quote, we learned by making analogies, Hirsch said. Now the university is saying that's off limits. How can you have a university course where ideas are not up for discussion or interpretation? January 22nd, from the Jewish Chronicle, Harvard also adopts the IHRA definition after settling anti-Semitism lawsuits. From the JNS, April of 2025, Yale quietly adds IHRA definition of Jew hatred to anti-bias policies. Trump gets in, and all these schools suddenly start imposing massive censorship on what American students and faculty can say about Israel, jeopardizing basic texts like Hannah Arendt because she believed Zionism was racism, which is one of the prohibited ideas, or professors who compare what the Nazis did to the Israeli treatment of Palestinians. You don't have to agree with that. The point is it's being banned. It's being censored by government pressure. And then just by the way, The Guardian today, July 30th, anti-Semitism training designed by pro-Israel groups is now becoming compulsory at American colleges. What's in it? Pro-Israel groups are creating indoctrination classes, like struggle sessions, as conservatives used to call them when this was done for anti-black racism or other forms of bigotry. And now every American student on American campuses has to go through these courses as a mandatory course designed by pro-Israel groups that want people to be indoctrinated about what anti-Semitism is. And of course, the ideas are things you might say about Israel are anti-Semitic. Our guest is ready. I just want to point to this one last thing. This is from the Knight First Amendment Institute, which is one of the leading free speech academic entities in the country. It's led by Jamil Jaffer, who I know very well. He was an ACLU lawyer, but one of the true ACLU lawyers who defended everybody's free speech. And they issued a statement on July 16th, just last month. The Knight Institute sounds alarm over new restrictions on campus speech. And this is what Jamil Jaffer said, quote, "It's disappointing that some of the nation's leading institutions of higher education are agreeing to curtail and punish criticism of Israel in the name of fighting discrimination. As major free speech groups have recognized, using the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism to delineate the outer boundaries of free speech will have the effect of prescribing or deterring legitimate political speech and scholarship." The lawyer who drafted the IHRA definition has himself raised similar concerns. Plainly, universities should address all forms of discrimination on campus, including by even-handedly enforcing the rules against harassment and threats. But by restricting criticism of Israel and its policies, including by faculty and students directly affected by those policies, universities compromise the values they should be defending: free speech, free inquiry, and equity as well. And just to illustrate how bipartisan it is, here's the Times of Israel, November of 2024. Chuck Schumer also was pushing to codify a IHRA anti-Semitism definition on campuses. So Schumer and Trump and all of these people are, as usual, joined at the hip in doing this. So my message to Stephen Miller is this: if you want to use your position in the White House and the influence you have with Donald Trump to impose censorship on American college campuses and American students and American professors, to bar them and punish them if they criticize the foreign country that you love and worship and have for life, and if you want to expand hate speech codes, as you're doing, to bar ideas that are offensive to the group to which you happen to belong, at least be honest about it. Just say that you're doing that and defend it. Stop lying about it. Don't call my reporting patently false when I can spend the next 3 hours documenting even more exactly what the Trump administration has been doing, the key role they've been playing in forcing these universities to adopt the hate speech codes that Stephen Miller last night had the audacity to pretend that he dislikes and hates, when he's the one, and the Trump administration are the ones that are attacking the free speech rights of Americans in very fundamental ways at the academic institutions that are supposed to be the pinnacle of free speech, where you can question all taboos and all orthodoxies without fear of being punishment. That's exactly the place where they're imposing their censorship more and more by expanding the list of ideas and views and opinions about a foreign country and about one particular minority group that's favored by the White House, where you will be punished if you express any of those ideas. That is a pure censorship regime, and that is exactly what the Trump administration is doing, and Stephen Miller's denial of that is nothing but a blatant lie. Thanks for watching this clip from System Update, our live show that airs every Monday through Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern, exclusively on Rumble. You can catch the full nightly shows live or view the backlog of episodes for free on our Rumble page. You can also find full episodes the morning after they air across all major podcasting platforms, including Spotify and Apple. All the information you need is linked below. We hope to see you there.